Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. Imagine burying the love of your life, only to hear his voice on your phone weeks later. The man you cried over, the man you thought you lost forever, whispering to you from beyond the grave, what if your husband's death wasn't a tragedy at all, but a scheme? And what if the family he left behind was never meant to find out? On a brisk Friday morning in late April, Daniel Carson kissed his wife, Libby, on the forehead. He tapped the doorframe twice, the same superstition he had carried for years, and promised back by dinner. He never came back. That evening, his aluminum fishing skiff was found capsized near the banks of the river. The water was swollen with spring floods, the motor sheared clean off, and one boot print was still pressed in the mud. Rescue teams scoured the current, dragging hooks and combing the driftwood. For 3 long days, the river gave nothing back. On the 4th day, a body surfaced 20 miles downstream. The coroner said it was too damaged for an open casket, but the dental records matched. And the wedding ring, etched with L+D04, was undeniable. The funeral was held under a sunlit sky. Libby clutched her daughter Mo's small hand, while their teenage son Miles sat stiff in the pews, eyes locked on the church door, as though he expected his father to walk in late, cracking a sheepish smile, apologizing for the cruelest joke ever told. Neighbors brought casseroles, shook their heads, and repeated the same sentence in different tones: "If you need anything." But grief was not the only thing moving through the Carson home. Because 3 weeks later, after the flowers had wilted and the condolences had stopped coming, Libby's phone lit up with a new voicemail, static, a breath, then a whisper, "Don't call back. It's better this way." Libby froze. She knew 2 things instantly. That was Daniel's voice. Daniel had never, not once in his life, whispered. And just like that, the funeral felt like a performance, and her husband's death began to unravel. Grief makes you second, guess everything, but sometimes grief is the only reason you start noticing the cracks. A week after the funeral, the sheriff returned Daniel's car from impound. Libby sat in the driver's seat, staring at the familiar crumbs in the console and the scuff marks on the floor. Then she saw it, his fishing tackle box, the one that should have gone down with the boat. She popped it open on the kitchen table. No river smell, no fish hooks left rattling. Instead, the sharp, unmistakable scent of peppermint. Daniel hated peppermint. He kept mints in the glove box, sure, but never in his tackle gear. To Libby, it wasn't just strange, it was wrong. And then came the mail. A receipt tucked into the glove compartment, dated 2 days before Daniel drowned. It was from a hardware store 2 towns over. Paid in cash, 4 rolls of duct tape, plastic sheeting, 4 bags of quick, set cement. Daniel wasn't a cash buyer. He wasn't a man who hid receipts, and he certainly wasn't a man who needed cement for any project she knew about. Libby's stomach sank deeper when Prairie State Mutual Insurance called. The representative's voice was polite and professional, but cautious. "We'll need more time to review your husband's claim. The circumstances of death are unusual." That one word rattled her like a window left unlocked in the middle of the night. And then came the final blow, a sympathy card in her mailbox, no return address. Inside, just one line was typed neatly on cream paper: "The greatest mercy is forgetting. Start again." Libby sat at the kitchen table, the peppermint tackle box on one side, the receipt on the other, and the unsigned card in her lap. She thought she was burying her grief, but in truth she was unearthing Daniel. Miles Carson had always been the practical one. At 17, he was the kind of kid who could fix a washing machine with spare parts or strip down a car engine just to see how it worked. Grief hadn't changed that about him. If anything, it sharpened it, so when Libby let him hear the voicemail, Static, breath, and that whisper, "Don't call back, it's better this way." He didn't cry, he didn't even flinch, he just replayed it. Again and again. Finally, he connected his laptop and slowed the audio file to half speed. Together, he and Libby sat in the dim kitchen, the ticking wall clock louder than either of them. At half speed, Daniel's whisper stretched into something unmistakable. His voice carried that tiny click at the end of every hard consonant. Miles froze the waveform, pointed at the jagged spike on the screen, and said flatly, "That's Dad, alive." Libby's throat tightened. "How can you be sure?" "Because he always did that," Miles replied, that little "I'm right" click in his voice when he wanted to sound in charge. "He's not dead, Mom. He's hiding." But Miles didn't stop there. He opened Daniel's old cell phone records through their family account, tracing the number that left the voicemail. Blocked, but not invisible. It pinged off a relay tower near the abandoned freight yard, a place Daniel had no reason to be. "Maybe it's a prank," Libby offered weakly, clinging to denial like a rope. Miles just shook his head. Pranks don't come with cement receipts and peppermint tackle boxes. From the floor, little Mo spoke up quietly, almost to herself. She was coloring with markers, but her words cut through the silence sharper than any evidence. "Daddy promised he'd take me to see the big fish when school was out." "He never breaks promises." Libby looked at her children, one dissecting waveforms, the other clinging to a child's memory, and realized the river had never really taken Daniel. Daniel had taken them. Fraud doesn't start with grand schemes. It starts with small lies, and Libby was finally learning how to see them. The first crack came when a friend slipped her a copy of the coroner's report. It read clinical and detached, but one line stood out like blood on a white sheet. Postmortem interval indeterminate due to environmental factors. Translation: the river had erased the clock. The coroner couldn't even say how long the body had been in the water. Add to that the face was unrecoverable, the hands damaged beyond recognition. The only identifiers were the teeth, and the ring etched with L+D04. Libby's chest tightened. That ring had been in her jewelry box weeks before the accident. She remembered polishing it. She remembered hiding it so Daniel wouldn't lose it. Her mind swirled. Had someone placed it? Had Daniel himself? Meanwhile, Prairie State Mutual stalled further. A second letter arrived, colder than the first, due to unusual circumstances surrounding insured's death. We are extending our review period. Unusual circumstances. Those words echoed in her head like a gavel, but the smoking gun came in the most ordinary place, Daniel's office drawer. Hidden beneath tax papers was a folded printout of their life insurance policy. One section highlighted in yellow, contestability period, 2 years. Suicide exclusion not applicable after 2 years. Daniel had purchased the policy 2 years and 4 days ago. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a countdown. On the back of the printout, Libby found something else, a 10-digit number, scribbled with Daniel's hurried handwriting. When she dialed it, a recorded voice answered, "You've reached Suncrest Storage." Libby's pulse raced. 50 miles south, off the interstate, the kind of place where men who wanted to disappear could tuck away their new lives. She looked at Miles and whispered, "We're going." The next morning, they packed a cooler, told little Mo it was a dentist appointment, and drove south. Behind the beige roll-up doors of Unit 27, Libby was about to discover just how far her husband's lies really went. Suncrest Storage was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. Endless beige roll-up doors, a cracked asphalt lot, and a manager who looked like he'd been paid to mind his business more than once. Libby told him a story about a misplaced key. Miles, sharper than his years, slid over the insurance printout with the scribbled number. The manager hesitated, then sighed, the look of a man who had learned that money and lies often go hand in hand. Unit 27, he muttered, handing them a spare lock pick. 20 minutes. Then I'm coming back. The lock clicked open. The smell inside wasn't river or mildew. It was rubber, dust, and secrets. Against the far wall sat a teal suitcase, a garment bag on a bent nail, and a small shoebox. Nothing else. Libby's hands trembled as she unzipped the garment bag. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, and a blazer, all the wrong sizes, clothes for a man starting over. The suitcase was worse. Inside, neatly packed toiletries still, sealed protein bars, and 4 burner phones in their boxes, prepared, planned, precise, but the shoebox was the heaviest. When Libby lifted the lid, her breath caught. Cash, bundles of it, rubber-banded tight. Next to the money lay a passport. Daniel's face staring back at her, but under a new name, Andrew Pike. Miles snapped pictures of everything, his hands steady even as his jaw clenched. At the very bottom, a single photograph. Daniel in a baseball cap, standing in front of a stucco house with a bougainvillea spilling red down the wall. On the back, scrawled in blue ink, wed. 10 a.m. Garden Gate. Libby's heart thudded like a drum. Daniel wasn't dead. He wasn't missing. He was waiting. The manager's footsteps echoed down the hall. They shoved everything back, locked the unit, and slipped out as if they hadn't just walked into the grave of their old lives. In the car, no one spoke. The silence was broken only when little Mo, still too young to understand, asked from the back seat, "Is Daddy playing hide?" And, "Seek." Libby gripped the steering wheel. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned. "No," she said, "he's hiding. We're seeking." And in that moment, the hunt for Daniel Carson truly began. The photograph was their only map, a stucco house with a bright splash of bougainvillea and a note about a Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Libby searched real estate listings until her eyes blurred, cross-referencing every stucco home within an hour of Suncrest storage, and there it was, a beige house in a neighborhood called Sunpable, with the exact garden gate from the photo. They drove down the next Wednesday morning. The air was heavy, the car silent. They parked half a block away under a dying tree, watching the house with nervous eyes and pounding hearts. At 10:03 a.m., a man in a baseball cap stepped out, dragging a garbage can to the curb, sunglasses, ball cap, just another neighbor, until he slowed, looked up, and froze. It was Daniel, alive, breathing, moving, not a ghost, not a memory, but a man who had buried his family in lies. Miles inhaled so sharply he choked. Mo whispered, "Daddy," as if the word itself might summon him, and Daniel's face gave him away. Recognition flickered like a match. His eyes widened, and then he bolted. The chase wasn't cinematic. It was clumsy, desperate. A track can toppled, bags split, flies rose. He ran through the side yard, and Libby followed, rage stronger than grief, determination sharper than fear. She cornered him by the sliding glass door. His hands went up instinctively, palms open like surrender could erase the crime. His mouth opened, but no excuse came fast enough. Miles stopped short at the garden gate, frozen. Mo stood silently behind him, clutching her stuffed bear like a shield. Libby's voice shook, not from weakness but from fury. "Say something." Daniel swallowed hard, eyes darting between them. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Those words, flimsy, cowardly, told Libby everything she needed to know. Her husband hadn't drowned. He hadn't been taken by the river. He had chosen this, and now face to face, there was no denying the truth. Daniel Carson had faked his death. Inside the stucco house, the air was heavy with dust and lies. A half-empty mug of coffee sat on the counter, a folded map on the table with circles drawn in blue pen. It looked less like a home and more like a staging ground for escape. Daniel leaned against the sliding glass door, his chest heaving. His eyes flicked from Libby to Miles to Mo, as if searching for the weakest link. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he began. "You have to understand I was drowning." The irony nearly made Libby laugh. He spoke quickly, like a man who believed words could build a lifeboat. He told them about debts, the loans he'd taken out against the business, the men who came by with smiles sharp enough to cut. He told them how the insurance policy had felt like an escape hatch, perfectly timed after the 2-year contestability period. The policy was the only way to protect you, Daniel insisted, his voice trembling. If the money came through, you'd be free, safe. You could start over without me dragging you down. Miles's fists clenched at his sides. "So you lied to us. You let us bury you." Daniel looked at his son with glassy eyes. "I thought it was the only way." Libby stepped closer, her fury cold and steady, and the body in the river. Who was he? Daniel's gaze broke. His silence was louder than any denial. Mo hugged her bear tighter. Her small voice cut through the air like a blade. "Daddy, did you forget about me?" That one question dropped him lower than any prosecutor could. His shoulders sagged, his excuses faltered, but still he clung to the script. "I did this for you, for all of us. Once the money came through, I was going to send for you. We'd be together again, just with new names, a clean slate." Libby's eyes narrowed. "No, you didn't do this for us. You did it about us." And that's not the same. For the first time since the funeral, Daniel stopped talking. He realized his family hadn't just found him, they'd unmasked him. The man they thought they'd buried was alive, but the husband and father they loved was already gone. The house was silent except for Daniel. Ragged breathing, he stood there, hands half raised, waiting for his family to forgive the unforgivable, but Libby had already made her decision. She had buried a husband once. She wasn't about to bury her children's future, too. "You're coming with me," she said. "We're going to the sheriff's office. You're going to confess. You're going to give back every cent before this family drowns in your lies." Daniel shook his head, panic flaring in his eyes. "You don't understand. If the wrong people find out, if they know I'm alive, they'll come after all of us." "Please, Libby, just give me time, one more day, one more week." But Libby had heard enough one mores to last a lifetime. She pulled out her phone. Daniel's voice cracked. "Don't." "Please." But Libby pressed the call button anyway. Within 20 minutes, the flashing red and blue washed across the stucco walls. Deputies moved in quietly, without sirens, so the neighbors wouldn't swarm. They guided Daniel out in cuffs. No resistance, no final plea, just a hollow look toward the family he'd betrayed. Miles didn't move from the garden gate. Mo clutched her bear so tightly its stuffing bulged at the seams. Libby stood with her head high, her heart pounding, knowing she had just saved her children, even if it meant destroying what was left of her marriage. The deputy closed the cruiser door, and just like that, the man who faked his death to free his family from debt was gone, this time not to the river, but to a jail cell. It should have been the end, but Daniel's scheme had reached further than anyone knew, and the ripples of his betrayal were about to crash back into Libby's life in ways she never imagined. For a brief moment after Daniel's arrest, Libby thought the nightmare was over. She thought the lie had been dragged into the light, and the family could finally breathe. But betrayal doesn't just disappear. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it knocks. 2 nights after Daniel was booked, the back door rattled at 3:17 a.m. The motion light snapped on, catching a shadow darting across the lawn. A pair of boots pounded against the dew-soaked grass, vanishing into the dark. The deputy assigned to patrol their street cruised over within minutes, sweeping the yard with a floodlight. The report said attempted burglary, but Libby knew better. These weren't random thieves. Someone else was tangled in Daniel's scheme, and now they knew she was the one who had ended it. She bought a second lock the next morning, pushed a chair under the door, and slept with a baseball bat propped against her nightstand. And, meanwhile, Prairie State Mutual descended with cold precision. An investigator with polished shoes and eyes like glass sat at Libby's kitchen table, asking questions that cut sharper than any blade. When did you first suspect? Why didn't you contact us sooner? Did you consider the value of the policy before confronting your husband? Libby stared him down, her voice steady. I only considered my children. The man scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. Somewhere in a windowless office, a file now bore the mark, fraud cooperative spouse, and then came the looming storm, the trial. Prosecutors prepared their case, stacking charges like bricks: insurance fraud, wire fraud, false reporting, conspiracy. Daniel's name filled the docket, but Libby knew her family would be dragged through every headline, every whisper, every courtroom glance. The town had already started talking. At the grocery store, the cashier, bagging her oranges, asked, did he always have that in him? At church, prayers came wrapped in suspicion. Even Mo, too young to grasp the full weight, whispered to her teacher, Daddy's not gone. He's just in a place where everyone wears the same clothes. For Libby, the worst part wasn't what the world thought. It was knowing the man she'd buried once was about to be buried again, this time by the justice system. And yet, the deepest questions still hadn't been answered. Who was the body in the river, and how far had Daniel's lies really spread? The courthouse smelled of coffee and nerves. Reporters lingered on the steps, their microphones angled like weapons. Inside, the air buzzed with whispers. The man who faked his death, the wife who exposed him, the family dragged into the kind of scandal small towns never forget. The prosecution was relentless. The DA painted Daniel as a manipulator, a man who built his family's grief into a business plan. Fraud, wire fraud, false reporting, conspiracy, each charge laid like bricks in a wall no man could climb. Then came the defense. Daniel's lawyer wore a silver tie and a mask of sympathy. He spun the story as one of desperation. My client was drowning in debt. He feared for his family. He saw no way out. This was not malice. It was a man's last, misguided attempt to protect the people he loved. The courtroom shifted uneasily. Could betrayal ever be called protection? And then they called Libby. She walked to the stand, steady despite the weight pressing on her chest. The lawyer asked her the predictable questions. Did your husband provide for you before the debts? Yes. Did he seem fearful in the months before his disappearance? Yes. Do you believe he loved you? Libby hesitated, then said he loved himself more than the truth. But it was her final words that sealed Daniel's fate. Looking directly at the jury, she said, my husband didn't die in that river. He killed something far more sacred, our trust. He turned grief into a tool, and when you do that, you don't just betray a policy. You betray a family. The silence that followed was deafening. The defense tried to claw back, but the evidence was overwhelming. The cash, the passport, the storage unit, the voicemail, the lies layered so thick even his silver-tongued lawyer couldn't scrub them clean. When the gavel finally dropped, Daniel was found guilty. Insurance fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, years in a federal prison. For Libby and the children, it wasn't triumph. It was survival. The man who faked his death was no longer a ghost, no longer a fugitive, no longer a husband. He was simply an inmate. But one question lingered like a shadow over the courtroom. If Daniel wasn't the body in the river, then who was? When the verdict came down, most of the town thought the story was over. The man who faked his death was in prison, the family he betrayed left to rebuild. But beneath the surface, one question still gnawed at investigators and at Libby most of all, whose body was in the river. The coroner's original report had been vague. Environmental damage, hands destroyed, face unrecognizable. Identification had hinged on teeth, and the wedding ring with L plus D04. But that ring, Libby knew, had been in her jewelry box until the very week Daniel disappeared. The state quietly reopened the case. They ran the body's DNA through databases. Weeks later, a hit came back. It wasn't Daniel Carson. It was a missing man from 2 counties over, a drifter who had vanished without family to fight for him. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. Daniel hadn't just staged an accident. He'd used another man's death as his disguise. A John Doe in the wrong place at the wrong time had become Daniel's ticket to a new identity. Libby sat in the sheriff's office as the detective explained. It hurt her heart hollow. The betrayal cut even deeper now. Her husband hadn't just lied, he had exploited a stranger's tragedy to build his own escape. The state debated whether to add charges, but without proof Daniel had caused that death, the case stalled. Officially, it was ruled an unfortunate coincidence. Unofficially, Libby knew better. She replayed the cement receipt in her mind, the hardware store trip, the cold precision of his timing. Daniel hadn't just been desperate, he had been calculating. For Libby, the revelation brought no closure. It was one more ghost in a story already too full of them. The town whispered again. If he could fake a death once, what else was he capable of? And for Libby, the real horror wasn't the man she'd lost. It was the man she'd loved, and how little she had truly known him. The trial was over. The verdict was sealed. Daniel Carson, once a husband, father, and provider, was now an inmate defined by numbers on a prison jumpsuit. But for Libby and her children, survival wasn't about courtrooms or verdicts. It was about learning to live in the silence Daniel left behind. She sold the failing business, kept the house, and rebuilt life. Brick by brick, Miles went off to college, drawn to engineering. I like problems with answers, he told anyone who asked. Mo grew quieter but sharper, drawing rivers and labeling them simply. Goes on. Letters arrived from prison once a month. Sometimes Libby read them, sometimes she let them sit unopened until recycling day. Each envelope carried apologies tangled with excuses, declarations of love tainted by self-pity. Daniel never once admitted what he did to the stranger in the river. Prairie State Mutual sent one last letter too. The policy was rescinded, the premiums returned. Money gone. It was cold, legal closure, nothing more. The town's whispers eventually faded, though never completely. At the grocery store, people still asked in hushed tones, "How could you not have known?" Libby learned the answer that silenced them. Love isn't a polygraph. Trust is a choice, and sometimes it betrays you. A year after the trial, Libby took Mo back to the river. They tossed breadcrumbs into the water, watching them drift away. "Does the river remember us?" Mo asked softly. Libby squeezed her hand. "No," she said, "that's our job." Because in the end, the river had never been the villain. It was just water, moving on, carrying secrets it never asked to hold. The real betrayal hadn't been in the current. It had been in Daniel's choices, in his decision to turn grief into a weapon, to gamble his family's love against a policy payout. And though the headline would always read, "Man fakes death for insurance," the truth was far more haunting. The man who faked his death lost more than freedom. He lost his family, and the family he tried to abandon. They survived. When trust becomes a tool, when love is twisted into leverage, what remains is never the same. Daniel Carson's story wasn't about money or even about death. It was about betrayal, and the people strong enough to outlive it, because in the end, he wasn't the tragedy. They were what survived it.